Okay, so getting into Jeff Johns' Green Lantern, or I guess continuing on with Jeff Johns' Green Lantern, we get into the origin of the Star Sapphire. So this is cool, because what Jeff Johns is gonna do is actually retcon a lot of the existing information with regards to Star Sapphires, but it's also really the first time he's expanded on the emotional spectrum. And what I mean by that is when he was doing his Green Lantern run, he was doing a lot of things at the same time. In the immediate, it was focusing on stories here and there that were kind of revamping characters. So going back and redoing the origin of Hal Jordan, introducing the Star Sapphires and their new origin, that kind of a thing. In the backdrop of it all, the Sinestro Corps was growing. The Sinestro Corps was expanding. Nobody really knew about it. I mean, it was kind of there, but it was something that people weren't wholly aware of. What this does is it says, okay, look, here are the new version of the Star Sapphires, and it just kind of introduces this so Jeff Johns can come back and reference it later on. Now, that's why I say this is kind of a big deal, because the Star Sapphires have a pretty huge origin. I mean, kind of going all the way back to the Golden Age, the Star Sapphires were there, but it wasn't really until DC Showcase number 22 in 1959 that the Star Sapphires played more of a significant role. Now, keep in mind, one of the whole ideals with the Star Sapphires back then, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second, but one of the whole ideals of the Star Sapphires back then was just kind of bolstering the Green Lantern landscape. But what this does is it basically picks up with the idea of Carol Ferris becoming a Star Sapphire yet again. And again, this is immediate, this is fast. The Star Sapphire just shows up, says, you've been a Star Sapphire before, you are the one person above all others that Hal Jordan cherishes, you are going to become a Star Sapphire, and you are going to serve the purpose of being one of us and helping us to basically defeat Hal Jordan and get our revenge and then kind of take over the world and that sort of thing. Now, of course, at this point, we switch over to Cowgirl, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to cover the character of Jillian Pearlman in our previous discussions when we were talking about Hal Jordan wanted and that whole relationship between the two of them and, Hal Jordan's shortcomings and so on and so forth, because Jillian Pearlman becomes the next Star Sapphire in the sense that Carol Ferris kind of shows up and begins freaking out and, of course, immediately goes after Hal Jordan, immediately recognizing the Star Sapphire on sight. It leads to a bit of a conflict between the two, but the heart of Hal Jordan is with Jillian Pearlman. Remember, Carol Ferris had made it quite clear that there was not going to be a relationship between her and Hal Jordan. There was in the past, but it was really one of those things where it's like, what's in the past is in the past, let's leave that then. We are co-workers, and that's really the extent of it, that's the limit of it. Now, of course, the Star Sapphire really kind of hits home at the idea that Hal Jordan still cares about Carol Ferris, and how could he not? I mean, they simply just have too much history together. They've been together for too long, they were really kind of associated with each other too much, they had a very physical and a very passionate relationship together, so it only makes sense that those feelings would be maintained. But recognizing that Hal Jordan's heart, at least at the moment, is with Jillian Pearlman, with Cowgirl, the Star Sapphire abandons Carol Ferris and merges with Jillian, merges with Cowgirl, which in turn makes her the newest version of the Star Sapphire. Now, this is when we get into Jeff Johns kind of going back and changing things, and that's why I wanted to wait until this moment to sort of bring this up. Again, this is a quick 3-issue story. It's not long by any standard of measurement, but with the original Star Sapphire, not really the original, but with the Carol Ferris Star Sapphire, the idea was that at the time, Hal Jordan the Green Lantern was still pretty much new. And so because of that, the idea was to basically expand him, grow him, get people introduced to the new landscape of the Green Lantern and what it meant. But the other half was to basically introduce kind of an antithesis to the Green Lantern itself. Now, Sinestro had already been established. Sinestro was the bad guy. He had a yellow ring. Green Lanterns were just weak to the color yellow for whatever reason. I mean, we know now that it's parallax, but at the time, there really was no definitive reason given. Back then, it was just their weakness is the color yellow, and that's just the way it is. And you just kind of had to accept it and, go with the stories accordingly. But that was the bad guy. The idea was to introduce somebody who could potentially be a love interest, or at the very least, somebody who could kind of prey on the feelings of Hal Jordan, and that came in the form of his love interest, Carol Ferris. Now, the way the Star Sapphires functioned back then in the 1950s and 1960s was that they were basically just a race of women who wanted to prove they were better than guys. And that was it. Like, there was no grandiose, huge grand poobah thing, some massive background story. That was all there was to it. They basically were able to mimic the power of the Green Lantern, and Star Sapphire became an enemy of Hal Jordan. Now, this eventually led into characters like Deborah Camille Darnell, I think it was, who was a Star Sapphire at one point in time. It was always this reoccurring theme that kept coming back, and it was an attempt by DC to always sort of reinvigorate and revamp interest in the Green Lantern landscape. The problem is that it never really worked out, because at the end of the day, there was really no oomph, there was no gumption behind the character. It was just an arbitrary villain out there somewhere that no one really understood or knew anything about. And so with Jeff Johns, when he comes back and he says, okay, that whole origin of the Star Sapphires just wanting to be better than guys, that's not the way it works anymore. The way it worked is that in the beginning, when the Guardians of the Universe basically began the process of shedding their emotion, that they went to all the members, all these different races, and said, look, you guys need to shed your emotion. These members of the Guardians, you have to walk away from your emotion. You have to abandon, the emotional spectrum so that you can have logic and reason that guides your lives. There were some that broke away and some that said, no, we are not going to follow this path, and they began to experiment with different types of emotions. Now, a handful of these were, a group of women who basically began to really kind of travel around the universe for billions of years, trying to find different aspects of the emotional spectrum to tap into. Remember, the emotional spectrum is not something you can just go and grab, right? Like, you can't go to the corner store and say, I'd like the emotion of compassion, if you don't mind. It doesn't work that way. It's really one of those things where you just kind of have to unlock it, harness it, tap into that power, so to speak. And with these particular Zamorons, what they had done is they had come across a planet whereby it was really like the last remaining men and women, so to speak, or the last male and female. And what they had discovered is that in their final moments, it's sort of Adam and Eve, Romeo and Juliet sort of scenario, assuming that they were the last living members of their race, the love for the two of them had taken form in a physical object that was basically more like a rock or a stone or a gem of some kind. And the result is that it bonded itself with one of the Zamorons. Now, this eventually led to the formation of the Zamoron culture, or I guess, the Star Sapphire group, which in turn began the process of going around and trying to find people, that could be used as their avatars to basically expand their numbers, which led to them encountering Carol Ferris. Now, that part, in terms of their numbers growing and trying to expand and so on, that's Geoff Johns grabbing the original Star Sapphire mythos, but that's really the only original aspect of it that he grabs. Everything else is totally different. Because of the fact that the Star Sapphires believe that love is the greatest of all the emotions, what they do is they basically bond, or at least the Star Sapphire bonds itself to a host, which in turn mates with somebody in particular, and then encases all life in this kind of gem construct, basically keeping it in a state of suspended animation. And so if we were to liken this to like a crazy person, it would basically be like if somebody believed that you were perfect the way you are, they loved you that much, they wanted to keep you perfect, they would encase you in suspended animation, and you would be stuck that way forever, almost turning you into kind of like a trophy or a doll of some kind. And so because of that, following the Star Sapphires isn't necessarily death per se, it's kind of like living death in the sense that they basically encase entire planets in living crystal. And that's the fate that befalls Hal Jordan should he mate with a particular Star Sapphire. And that's what makes them so dangerous. Now again, the Star Sapphires are governed by love and compassion. It's the overriding factor of who they are. Much in the same way that the Red Lanterns are governed by rage and anger, the Star Sapphires are the same way. But should Hal Jordan mate with Carol Ferris as a Star Sapphire, or Jillian Pearlman as a Star Sapphire, it would basically result in the complete conquering of the planet Earth, the whole Earth being encased in crystal, and that's really about it. And so it's always this cat and mouse game where the Star Sapphire will show up, it'll chase down Hal Jordan, he'll just kind of have to evade, and that'll be it. Now, one of the other things that Geoff Johns kind of does here is he adds a little bit of comedy in this, where Cowgirl kind of shows up, tries to harness Hal Jordan. It's this idea that like her attraction to him, physical and otherwise, immediately seizes control, and it's almost kind of comedic. It's almost kind of funny in the sense that it's just like, oh, I'm running away from the chick who's crazy and just won't let me go. But because of the power of the Star Sapphire, because of the fact that it's really one of these things where it's like the ex-girlfriend versus the current girlfriend, it really just kind of turns into a battle between Star Sapphire and Carol Ferris. Carol Ferris becomes a Green Lantern. At the end of the day, however, where Jillian Pearlman is basically defeated, ultimately this leads into the arrival of the Zamorons and a battle between them and Hal Jordan. Now again, it's really this notion that they intend to kind of take him down and put him in a situation where they're like, look, choose which one you're going to mate with. You're going to mate with one, choose one of them, or we're going to kill you. We're going to kill either one of them. And so you have to choose. Now, ultimately, he chooses neither. He says no, he hasn't chosen either one of them. And so because of this, he actually kind of runs up on one of the Zamoron alien chicks and like kisses her. And so the Star Sapphire is like, he's chosen her, and so the Star Sapphire just kind of races off and bonds with this alien chick, which results in them having to forcefully remove it, meaning they have to basically retreat and go back to their base of operations. But again, this is not designed to like establish Carol Ferris as the new Star Sapphire going forward. It's basically designed to say, here are what the Star Sapphires are, here are what the Star Sapphires about. Basically saying, we're going to see them return. We're going to see them play a role in the realm of Geoff Johns' Green Lantern. Again, this is basically what he did with a lot of these things. For example, as part of this story, in the backup features, there was Tales of the Sinestro Corps, basically us learning about the different members of the Sinestro Corps that have existed over the years and the purpose that they serve, why they were chosen, so on and so forth. Kind of a cool little series of stories. We might cover those once we get closer to Sinestro Corps War. But ultimately, when they remove this Star Sapphire gem from the head of this Zamoron who's been chosen, again, this is Geoff Johns building up what we're going to see with the Green Lanterns. It's really the first introduction that we get with regards to everything else that's going on. We have, of course, what looks like the Orange Lantern stone. We end up having, of course, the Green Lanterns, and then we have the Star Sapphires, but there's also 4 other aspects of the emotional spectrum. And so it was, again, Geoff Johns basically saying, hey, look, guys, here's the first time we're really delving into the origin of another aspect of the emotional emotional spectrum, but there's so much more to come later on down the line. Plus, there's also talk of a war. Of course, we know that kind of being the Sinestro Corps War slash, Blackest Night. And so again, it's basically building up and saying the Green Lantern mythos as you know it is about to expand by a huge margin. There's going to be so much more that's introduced than you can imagine at this point in time. So again, it was really kind of setting the stage, sort of whetting our palate, giving us an idea of what things were coming later on down the line, which of course, as we know, ends up turning out to be pretty awesome. So in any event, again, this was a pretty short story. I mean, it was only 3 issues long, not a whole lot of explanation there, really just kind of a chance to sort of give us a new origin for a group that had previously existed, kind of bolster their ranks, show us that there's more to the emotional spectrum. But yeah, guys. Anyway, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.